All right, wonderful. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you reach us from, to today's webinar. My name is Kai Wackwitz. I'm very happy to host today's webinar here about urban air mobility and why the ground element of this mobility is so important. As you saw in the title, we have some great presenters with us today. I'll introduce you in a second. Just for everyone who's joining right now, I hope audio and video is working well. We are having you guys will have the opportunity to raise questions anytime. So please feel free to use the Q&A function in your Zoom. It's somewhere in the bottom bar. So please feel free to enter all your questions. Again, it's a great opportunity to connect with our great speakers here today. So please use that tool. We have a Q&A part in the end. This Q&A part will at least be 15 minutes long. So happy to answer all of your questions. If there are any questions that will be answered throughout the webinar, then even better. So today's webinar will be 1 hour long. We have this webinar recorded, so for you guys to revisit, or for people that were not able to join today, this will be made available later on YouTube. So for everyone who registered and everyone who's interested in, there will be a YouTube link to revisit this webinar at a later stage. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Dr. Christoph Selig. He is CCO at Unisphere, the next-gen operation management system for drones, eVTOLs, and vertiports. We have Rasha Alshami, founder and head of LYNEports, an advanced air mobility planning solution and ground and airspace integration. And we have Ignacio Rodriguez, managing director of Bluenest, a vertiport infrastructure company shaping the future of advanced air mobility. And my name, Kai Wackwitz, I'm the CEO and founder of Drone Industry Insights, the leading source for UAM and drone market data, insights, and developments. So, and to give everyone a better chance to tell in much greater detail what they do and how they do it, I would like to hand over the word to Christoph to give a little more exhaustive introduction to who he is and what he does.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for having us, Kai. Yeah, Unisphere, we are a company around since more than 7 years in the AAM industry, and we work basically with drone companies, eVTOL companies, and vertiport companies. And what we do is twofold in the vertiport area. So if you look at the assessment phase of vertiports, so where to place vertiports, designing networks of eVTOL services, and this is one area where we support with what we call operational data analytics, where we match the eVTOL capabilities, operational and regulatory requirements with the prevailing weather conditions. And in combination of that, we gain a lot of insights that are useful for the planning of vertiports. And the second aspect is we have a platform which is automating weather risk assessment, flight planning tasks. And this is now in the market for drones, but we are also working with a few vertiport companies on adapting it to vertiport needs, which means also integration of aviation grade sensors, aligning with the current regulatory requirements. And yeah, these are the two things we're working on, and very happy to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you so much. Rasha, would you give us a few introductory words to what you do?
Absolutely. And thank you, Kai, for having us at LYNEports here with Drone Industry Insights. What we're doing is mainly on the software solutions. We create software solutions for infrastructure planning. This is specifically helpful for vertiport developers, operators, and also architects and cities to understand how to safely integrate the infrastructure that is required for these aircrafts. The beauty of the software is that it doesn't necessarily only have the eVTOL aircrafts, but it also integrates drones and soon helicopters. So it's going to be growing to encompass every single aircraft that is out there. In addition to that, it follows the regulatory frameworks from IASA, FAA, and other regulatory bodies out there. The software is agile, so we understand that the regulations are still shaping around these aircrafts. However, the software already takes that into consideration. All these updates that are happening or will happen will be reflected on the software. So we make sure that we are adhering to the regulatory bodies, and we also do our best to work with them and understand what is required on that side. And also we work with other eVTOL companies.
All right, sounds great. Thank you. Jose, can you give us a little introduction of who you are and what you do?
Hello, good morning, everybody. It's great to be in this event to close the year in a magnificent way before the Christmas. Thank you, everybody. Well, my name is Jose Rodriguez. I come from south of Spain. Even though I studied telecommunications, I always work in air traffic management, then UTM, then eVTOLs. I was in one of the manufacturers, and then I moved to the part that needs to be there ready at the beginning, which is the infrastructure in the ground to paving the way to the advanced air mobility or IAM. It's great to collaborate with partners like Unisphere. Also, I like a lot the solution of Rasha Alshami. I mean, the LYNEports. Hopefully, we have more time next year to do things together also. In Bluenest, well, we are starting this preparation of the infrastructure, the vertiports, what I call intelligent heliports. And we're preparing these remote control solutions based on remote tower or small airports or even advanced heliports. So we see that the mobility will change gradually to the air. The sky is there for us, and the eVTOLs are getting ready, and we need to be ready before they are ready. So we want to be a leader, a fundamental part of the advanced air mobility. Company Bluenest is the advanced air mobility part of Globalvia. Globalvia is doing highways, fast train, metro, buses in UK, so a lot of mobility, multimodality. And this was the last part, the aerial part that was missing in the Globalvia group. And we want to operate vertiport, even create networks, okay, connecting our own vertiports and even vertiports of other operators to be interoperable and environmentally sustainable, and also sustainable in the which is affordability, no, the monetary or the business case. So we are working in passenger flights, but before we want to start in cargo operations to learn to mature our operations, our procedures, and to improve all the artificial intelligence that is involved in a vertiport. Because vertiports will use cameras, will use local meteorology stations. You have to put everything in the mixer and guarantee that the most critical operation, which is the takeoff and landing, is totally safe. So this is our goal, to optimize the 3D mobility starting from the vertiports. So yeah, doing cargo, logistics for hospitals, ports, and later on, even big cargo and passengers, which is all a dream we share, okay? The passenger flights. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your introduction. That is very interesting. So, as you can see, we have a really interesting mix of people here that have different hold different shares, have different focuses on the same thing. And as you saw in our title, we said that the the aerial revolution will start on the ground. I think one of the main factors that is now different is that you cannot really operate, at least as of now, an eVTOL, like, starting from your driveway. Instead of driving to work, you fly to work. Like all of those promises from air taxis and personal aerial vehicles and all of that, this is not going to happen. And I think that was a bit of a tough realization in the industry, that you have to take off on land on something that is called a certified takeoff and landing surface. And that's not all. The main problem that now comes up is, where should these be located? Like, what are strategically good points? There was a white paper from Uber, I think it was from 2016 or 17, that made this thought game where they said, like, okay, let's build those hubs, and then they calculated different traffic amounts and these kind of things, and it turned out that this was not really feasible. So in general, maybe Rasha, we start with you, since you run all of those simulations. Where do you see like the overall feasibility of advanced air mobility? Do you see it in the city centers? Do you see it for commuters? Do you see it only rural? Where do you see that technology coming into reality first?
So it's a very interesting question, and the answer is to that, it depends on the region. It depends on what the people want. And we can do as many calculations and do so many Excel sheets about where would be the best networks, and we might be wrong. And this has happened many times before. So that's why LYNEports is the software solution to help others also understand what it means when we're planning for a vertiport or creating a network and where should it be located. Definitely, there is a lot of other factors, like what you mentioned with the certification, certifying the land. There's weather. There is developers also involved into this. So there's a lot of factors, but identifying where sites should be, that also needs to be given. The answer or the question should be also given to the architects and developers to understand where those sites could actually be located. The beauty of the software, and this also helps with the planning, the initial planning, or on how the site would look like, if the site would be feasible or not, and identifying that site feasibility. With the software, we don't necessarily do these calculations because, as I mentioned, it really depends on the location. It depends on how the people will use these eVTOLs, whether they're going to be using it for emergency, are they going to use it for tourism, what is it? And every region differ. So with our software, as I mentioned, it's more for the planning and understanding how to plan those sites and making sure that they're safe.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, maybe I can add on a bit. From our perspective, what we see is two phases of planning. So one is very high level, where you ask what are good good areas to kick off an eVTOL air taxi operations. And we hear a lot of talking about Dubai. There's, I think, Skyport started few weeks ago, the construction of the vertiport there. So we see really some things happening in Middle East. At the same time, we hear a lot of announcements going on in Norway as well. So very different regions and very different conditions to think about. So at Dubai, it's of course hot temperatures. So you need to think about cooling down maybe the cabin for the passengers. You need to think about what is the impact of, for example, also particles, dust in the air on visibility. So like there's very different questions from a planning perspective compared to Norway, where you say you don't have these issues with high temperatures. It's rather low temperature. It's icing. It might be also the topic of day and nighttime effect. So in Norway, we all know in wintertime, there's not a lot of daytime. So how do you operate if you fly VFR only? So this is like, I think, a very strategic high level thing where you start working on where is the best place to operate. And I think this is not a decision of the vertiport company, but a joint decision making with the eVTOL companies, because it's depending on their aircraft capabilities. And I think we have a few lead market going on at the moment, but I think this is really speaking for eVTOL passenger transport. What Nacho was explaining, I think, is a bit different. If you start with drones, there might be different considerations as well. But I think this is a very important initial question to start with.
Right. Jose, how do you see this? Where do you see those hubs happening first? And since you are involved in like all kinds of dimensions, do you see the smaller ones come into operation first and then the larger ones, or do you already see like a strong, demand in larger vertiports?
Yeah, the same way we see small drones already certifying with CE marking, class C5, for example. We see BBLOS corridors for medical emergencies in France and Germany already. Yeah, we should start in places that have low risk, even if the demand is not so high as in a city, but we cannot start developing our products and improving our solutions in risky areas. We should test and then deploy commercial operations in rural, coastal areas. This is a kind of compromise between the demand and what you can do with the permits to fly. And where the eVTOLs are now certified, they are starting just with the small ones for cargo. So let's start learning from the cargo operations. That's our philosophy. Analyze very well the routes, how optimal they are with the meteo conditions you have, not even in the vertiport itself, in the cylinder around the FATO and the area controlled by us, but also in the route itself. Sometimes we will have ideal routes, but then we will have to adapt. So I think we have to take care of the first testing in low risk areas with smaller drones, learning and by doing, changing our procedures. We'll have like at least we foresee a couple of years of heavy, intense learning, and then little by little deploy bigger payloads and finally passengers, and then in parallel gradually enter from low risk areas, low density areas to suburban areas and then urban areas. We need to take care of the 4G coverage, of the meteo. A lot of things need to be taken care of. So we need to start testing as soon as possible. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Because right now, I think we are a bit of in a situation like when cars came into this world. You had to go to the pharmacy to buy your gasoline and these kind of things. So the problem that I see, I don't know if you guys support that view, is that currently with the available energy density in batteries, we have the problem that these platforms will probably need to recharge or swap batteries at every stop. So that means there is, also in contrast to helicopters, there's a big need to have that physical infrastructure in place to recharge or swap batteries for these platforms. And I think that's a huge task that is very challenging to build this infrastructure. Now, we are basically with eVTOLs evolving and slowly but steadily coming to a point of certification and entry into service in a few years from now. Will they even have a takeoff and landing pad, and will they even have the infrastructure in place to get all the power back charged in to fly the next route? How do you see this? Like, are we maybe having a bunch of eVTOLs sitting around and not the ground infrastructure in place, or how do you see this? Is there eVTOL companies, sorry to expand on that, but eVTOL companies are in parts strongly financed. There's a lot of money that goes into this, right? Billions in cases. I don't see those funding amounts going into the ground infrastructure. And I'm wondering, is it not needed? Is it not as complex? I mean, it's also a certified infrastructure, right? So there's also a certain process that you have to go through. You have a certain time that this process takes that you probably won't be able to shorten. So my question is, do you see the ground infrastructure ready by the time the first eVTOLs will be certified and entering service? Christoph?
Yeah, one thought I'm having here is so we had an exchange with different companies engaged in that, and the energy density is for sure a topic, but we also have very different types of eVTOL. So we have this multi-copter approach, which is rather short distance optimized, but we also have the type of Joby Archer with lift and cruise models, which have a much higher range. And what I learned now from some interesting talks in the last month is basically that they are looking at Joby Archer for short distance because they can do more turnarounds. And it's basically exactly addressing what you said. They were aware of we cannot charge all the times. That's slowing down the process a bit. So we try to go for the eVTOL with a larger endurance, and then we try to optimize a bit on flying twice or three times with the same battery capacity. So I think that's one of the topics, but I think there's also a lot of discussions on vertiports, vertistop, vertihub, whatever the names are given to these things. But of course, you need infrastructure to maintain. You need infrastructure to charge, also to land overnight. And I think Jose has a bit more details on this because not every vertiport will be the same. So I think this is quite interesting to understand that vertiport is not a vertiport.
I agree. Wait. I agree, Christoph. No vertiport will be the same. It will be unique in the air part and the ground part. We'll have to adapt to the different operations, like sometimes cargo, passengers, mix. There will be a small, medium, big, located in urban, suburban, airports, different meteorology conditions, so different protection even of the noise that you create, the turbulence that you create. We know that the operations of eVTOL will be more silent and quiet than helicopters, so this will enable that this mobility goes into the urban areas with less restrictions. Regarding the funding that Kay was commenting, I think yes, even if we are not funded, and there were some studies also by SMG Consulting that the money is flowing into the eVTOLs and not so much into the vertiports. And this is more needed. Like there are no airlines or aircraft flying without airports. In the same way, you will have the vertiports needed for the AAM. But yeah, I think there are big companies coming from the airports, corporate funded, and also money flowing into some that are purely oriented to vertiport solutions that are now getting interest even from big companies of construction and so on. So we have some disappearing, some other appearing, and some other getting funding. This is positive. It's true that we run into a risk that when the eVTOLs like Joby, Archer, some in China, they start operations, maybe the regulation for vertiports is not so mature as the special conditions for drones and eVTOLs. And we will have discrepancies, we will have conflicts there. We'll have to solve things very, very quickly between the industry that is there. Because a lot of effort is invested into the drone itself, but the only thing we have is EASA, the prototype specifications from March 2022. And now we are waiting to ICAO to make their work and to step forward and progress fast on the really applicable regulation for 2027-28 for vertiports. Till that moment, we have to work for in very small drone pads for cargo, and in case we try with passenger, we have to use the Annex 14 of ICAO for the aerodrome specification from ICAO. So this is also a challenge. The regulation for us in the vertiport is still kind of missing and still unwritten for many things like procedures for vertiport operations. Okay.
Also to add to what Chris and Jose mentioned, there's definitely, I mean, these aircrafts go without doubt that they have many advantages. I mean, they have zero emission, they're low noise, as has been mentioned many times. That already adds value, and I think we can all agree that there is always nowadays in our streets it's becoming less and less freedom when we're taking our cars and we're stuck in traffic. Obviously, that's not everywhere. It's just in some cities and some certain locations that are congested. But we can all agree that the way the urban planning was created when cars were introduced, and it was something very new, and they were convincing people to take cars back then, people were not really happy. They wanted to still use horses. So I don't want to make the same similarities, but when we're looking at introducing new technology, there's always going to be that factor of acceptance and that factor of non-acceptance. This is very, very normal in any type of technology. Now, these aircrafts go without doubt. There's a lot of funding that it's taking place. Some of these aircrafts are in the process of getting certification. They are without doubt going to be good for the environment in many ways in the way we're transporting. But the question is, how do we make sure that they are integrated properly within a certain network, within certain safety measures that we need to have? And most importantly, Kai, what you mentioned about the charging. Obviously, they need to be charged whether we like it or not. Now, the way we deal with charging, it could be different. It could be that they charge at vertiports, at vertistops, as Chris has mentioned, and what Jose is working on with Bluenest vertiports, but also they could be there could be an areas a whole area for charging aircrafts, and then other areas for just parking. So there's many ways of how we could deal with what would mean when these aircrafts are on the ground, because most of the time I'm assuming they're going to be in air in certain operations of the day or night. But there's definitely a lot of planning that needs to take place, and they all need to be happening in parallel. It's not that something will come before the other. They need to be done together at the same time in the same path. This is what I believe.
Yeah, and just
Well,
to
almost,
add on,
please go ahead.
yeah, sorry. Okay. But I just want to mention, because the regulatory aspect is something we deep dived into early this year. And as Jose mentioned, there is a prototype specification for VFR vertiports. So basically for eVTOL that fly according to visual flight rules. So a pilot is on board, the conditions need to be clear, you need to see other aircraft, and this is how you avoid and detect and avoid. So basically, this is the very standard type of flight operations many private pilots probably know. But the topic here is, it's a prototype regulation by EASA, and every single state is responsible for figuring out how they deal with these vertiports, which means you don't have a security on or safety on a regulatory level. It might be you're building a concept in Spain, and you go to Italy and they tell you, no, we want it different because of that. And I think this is one issue when scaling the infrastructure, because once the eVTOL is certified, it's certified. So, but for the vertiport, it's at least if you stay on the VFR vertiport, it's still the topic that it will be different in every country. And then there will be at one point in time IFR vertiport regulations, and I think this is another topic. So if you switch from visual to instrumental flight rules, the thing is you might have to redesign some of the equipment. This also means you don't want to have very expensive sensors or whatever installed by day one on your VFR vertiport if you don't know how long this investment will last. So I think this regulatory uncertainty is for sure a very interesting topic. And but what you mentioned on the funding, I've also seen a question in the Q&A on that is basically, I think it's a bit different. It's site-specific funding often that goes on. So I think you don't need to have like billions of funding as a vertiport company by day one. But if you have a local interest, there is like specific real estate topics. They might be interested in funding it in Madrid, and the other one interested in doing that in Dubai. So it's not necessarily the case that the vertiport company needs to bring in all the money, which is the case for the eVTOL company. They need to get through the certification with the money they have, and if they don't have enough money, we've seen in the past what's happening. So it's a quite critical topic, and maybe vertiport companies are a bit more lean on that end.
That's true. I mean, a lot of the things such a structure would need are commonplace. I mean, you have a building, and then you have also certain standards on how you build a takeoff and landing surface and these kind of things. So there are a lot of things that are already, law and things that you can simply apply. But there are also a couple of things that are still open, as you mentioned, like, for example, the handling of dangerous goods. And maybe also another question on how even to get all that, not just all the equipment, but also simply the power alone to one of those ports. We have a really good question here in the Q&A. For everyone, please use that function. It's great. Please keep doing what you're doing. There's a lot of good questions already. Please use that tool. It's fantastic. One of the questions is that basically the ground infrastructure, and maybe Rasha, you can expand on that, is basically determined by the current limitations in flight range. So these drones or eVTOLs, passenger cargo carrying platforms, have a certain limitation with this current technology, and that basically determines the flight routes, that determines the network, the grid that you have to build in which they operate. Is that something that you look in your simulations as well? Like, do you use these kind of assumptions to build networks and routes, and what it would need in terms, also as a second question, what it would need as in terms of electrical power to supply these verti hubs with the power to reload?
Yeah, and that's actually a really great question. So with these aircrafts, definitely, I mean, every aircraft has some limitations, but with limitations also comes creativity. So within the software, there is ability to help in the planning and understanding the limitation of the aircraft and what is in terms of size. Currently, at the moment, we don't have the operations as this data is not publicly available. However, when it is publicly available, we'll be able to integrate it in the software. We're taking it from a planning, early planning stage. So meaning we look at the aircraft size, the infrastructure, and the design of the infrastructure is already oriented to the aircraft size. And that enables of understanding the safety requirements around that aircraft or multiple aircrafts in alignment with the regulatory frameworks. This is how we're doing it. But it is much easier when we look at it in terms of 3D geospatially and understand what are the limitations around the site, and we understand what is going on. If there's development, if there's buildings around, what would be that route? In LYNEports, currently you can simulate flights, you can understand these obstacles and see if they are quite restrictive in terms of what the regulations are recommending, which I believe they're really great in that part. The authorities are doing an amazing job. And they're also giving some type of freedom for the OEMs when it comes to adding those aircrafts at vertiports. But you can simulate flights, you can do the routes, you can understand what also from community acceptance, how that would look like. Most importantly also, I mean, we've partnered with Unisphere. It can easily help in planning the flight corridors and the ins and outs for the vertiport based on wind directions and wind orientation. And this already gives an indicative better planning for the vertiport, which also takes us to the second part. But this is a very important main part when we're even looking to certify vertiports. We need to understand, is this planning proper? Is this planned properly or not? And then we can take it to the second phases and to get the vertiport certified. But we're focusing on the early stage planning at the moment.
All right. Wonderful. Thanks. Maybe a good follow-up question on this, because basically what you think about, you know, those early claims of what urban air mobility could be, thousands of flights per day through the city, you know, no more traffic jams. We take all the traffic from the road and bring it into the air, and therewith both are faster. You know, you don't have those congestions on the ground, so traffic is moving again, and everything that can fly will fly. So we are far away from this. First of all, because of the network, and then now, as you mentioned, Rasha, there's a ton of limitations that come on top of those, you know, things. So you have weather, you have buildings in place, you have winds, you have certain routes that you can only fly, and maybe even making some routes completely unfeasible. So there's a lot of limitations now that are being stacked on top of that promise. And now the big question, of course, is what is left of that promise? And here's one very good question also from the Q&A. Please, again, keep using that tool for you, Jose. And it's about, how do you see, you spoke about multimodality earlier. How do you see eVTOLs or drones as an extra tool, as a, for example, for medical cases, as an emergency lane, where these kind of goods or people can move much quicker through a city than they can move now? Like, do you have concepts or ways of how you make this part of the overall public transport and individual transport, or what's your approach on multimodality in specifically? Rasha, sorry, that was for Jose. Sorry. Jose is muted. Sorry for that. But Rasha, please feel free to follow up.
Start, Rasha, please, if you want. Start. It's okay.
Thank you. I think with multimodality, I still stand on the part that I mentioned, that it really depends on the community. And this is coming from working on various airports and many vertiports. But the idea is that it really depends on the region, and it really depends on the area. Vertiports can be in so many shapes and forms. And while I totally agree that to move things from the ground and put it in the sky is still far-fetched in the future. But if you think about other examples, and I'm taking this to cars at the moment, that problem did not exist, and now we're facing it. There's a lot of CO2 emissions. People are getting sick from all the air that it's not even clean anymore, and we're spending a lot of time in traffic. This is not only the only problem, but also when we're talking about emergency transportation and transporting people to hospitals, there are people that die on the road because of congestion. Now, there's a lot of mitigation that are happening on the ground to fix that, but we can do that way more efficiently at low altitude transport. With multimodality and the way it's going to happen, there's different ways of integrating it. That's why I keep insisting that it's important to also bring urban planners and urban designers into this topic. It's not only for aviation. Even airports have been designed by urban planners and architects. It's important to bring them on the table to discuss how they could make that happen. And vertiport developers are actually standing at a really great opportunity to help in fixing this challenge. It's not an easy job to do all of this with not enough information from the OEMs, but I think they're doing all of what they can for that. But with multimodality, there's definitely many solutions. I don't think it's the problem. It's about giving the right tools to the communities to help in design and plan what they think would be the right fit for them.
Thank you very much. Jose, maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, thank you, Kay, Rasha. Yeah, there is this question from the audience, very interested, from Young. So I was reading, there are a couple of them. One is, what is the link between transportation infrastructure, like roads or even metro in cities? Of course, you can enhance the multimodality. That's the purpose of our company, to do the door-to-door, okay, transportation of goods or people. So the same way we are selling tickets of metro that later include car sharing, we would like to do the same with transport of goods and people with the air. So if we see that the solution in the air is more efficient, both in financially or also in time, or depending on the parameter that the user is requesting, okay, you can put like the searchers for the planes, for the connections. You can search by time, by price. So we will try to create these connections optimal with artificial intelligence, having all the flow management, all the information of the municipality to know if there is let's say, a traffic jam in the city that will prevent the delivery to happen in less than half an hour. So you can maybe pay a premium to have it ensured that it's in your door with a drone in 1 hour maximum or whatever. Yeah, we'll have this kind of very advanced calculations. We'll try to bring all the stakeholders in the ecosystem of transport of goods and passengers. And the financing, yes, will come. It will be mostly private and even public when you are using concessions of land inside the city. You know, sometimes, like in the Madrid hospital, we are trying to get some space near the hospital that is owned by the municipality to have this locker where the drones will already land and drop the package, and the doctor in the hospital just will go with the mobile phone with the QR code, will open the window, get the package, or even deliver it there, and then send it to the other hospital. So we are developing several solutions for last mile and for suburban areas to connect cities also, even for long range. So we are trying to cover all the different business cases, cargo, passengers, distances, especially at the beginning, not trying very heavily the part in the urban areas, because the regulations, even to fly in a general airspace, is very strict. You need parachutes, everything to be certified in the drone, and the space in the urban areas is even more expensive. So we are trying to reach a compromise solution to fly outside the cities and gradually enter into the cities. Collaborate with all the stakeholders, with hospitals, with port authorities, with municipalities that also need to create the regulation for their private or public managed lands or properties. So yeah, it's not easy. It will take some years, but I envision that in 10 years we'll have this complex and optimal communication of goods and passengers.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a tricky task to find a very individual solution, tailored to a specific use case and tailored to a certain area or city. I think it's very hard to find the right audience in terms of city planners, in terms of people that are open to this technology, because as we all know, flying is very energy intensive. And taking off and landing, especially, I think it's I think just below rockets, it's the most wasteful way of moving things. So you really better have a really good reason why you would use this kind of transportation, right? So there's also a good question from the audience that price-wise. So it will be probably very much more expensive to move these things by drone or eVTOL compared to a car. I mean, you could probably save some money because you shorten the travel time a lot. So I see this personally in spaces where you have difficult topography, like you have Norway with all the fjords, you have islands, you have mountains, maybe you have areas that are very hard or in parts of the year inaccessible by road. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. But then again, what are the use cases that will, be the ones that people jump on first? Like, is there anything where you focus on first? Maybe Christoph, what have you learned in the past in terms of what are the cases that people like to see in their neighborhood and where they would also invest not just the electrical power needed, not just to educate all the people that live there and get them familiar with these platforms, with the looks, with the noise, with everything that comes with it. What you learned in terms of use cases, and maybe also what these use cases have in terms of requirement on the ground infrastructure?
Yeah, so maybe one step earlier, because I saw also in the Q&A a bit of a mixed up between drones and eVTOL, just to make this a bit clear. So we have drones that follow different regulatory bodies or regulatory requirements, the same bodies, and we have the eVTOL. So eVTOL follows crewed aircraft, they follow VFR operations, IFR operations, which means like initially visual flight conditions, then instrumental, so you can also fly with low visibility, and then they might transition at one point to remotely piloted aircraft operations. And this is the chance where you switch from one pilot, one aircraft, to one pilot, many aircraft. And I think this is a very crucial development, because we touch point a bit on the topic, when is it a viable business case? And a viable business case is, of course, if one pilot is operating or overseeing multiple of these aircraft in parallel, much easier to achieve. So I think that's one important point. If we talk about drones, we follow the SORA methodology in Europe. We have very different things. So we can start urban operations today. Of course, there's high risk prevention things you need to do, but we have today operations in urban areas with drones. So drones are a much easier thing, and also the landing infrastructure for drones is not that certifiable or not that strict in terms of what is needed compared to the passengers. So I think this is just important to be clear, because we are switching a bit between cargo and passengers, and the rules are different for that. And I think the more challenging part of the urban integration is when it comes to passenger transport. And for the passenger transport, I think, I was just last week in San Francisco on a conference, and I liked one statement of a panelist. He said they're looking at four things. One is like high value, time critical. They say hard to reach destinations, which can also be traffic jams in some cities, and services that are being paid today. So of course, it's nothing new to have urban air mobility. We have helicopter operations in certain cities around the globe already today. So it's nothing that is like completely new to the market. It might be challenging to integrate in cities where you have good public transport and so on. But so the general thing is here where to focus on. And I think this kind of rule of thumb is quite interesting. If you say you have people willing to pay money today, you have like high delivery costs, which is either a lot of time saving, time critical deliveries, can be emergency topics. And I think what is also from a user adoption perspective quite interesting, that it's working throughout the year. So if you start in Dubai, which has quite good conditions throughout the year, that might be quite nice. So you have certain heat periods. But if you start even in Germany, we did a look at Munich, and in Munich in wintertime, you have a lot of icing conditions. And if the service is unreliable due to weather, the user adoption is quite challenging. So I think this is one thing to consider. But to make it viable, I think the long term is always we need more level of autonomy, and this is only achieved if we step by step go towards one-to-N operations with many drones or eVTOL, for both the same, being monitored by a single observer or pilot.
But that, of course, is a huge thanks, Christoph. But that's, of course, a huge challenge when right now all those eVTOLs, I think, except of a few, are VFR platforms, right? So they are platforms that are being literally piloted. So with a pilot on board. So that I think is also very important. So it's nothing that where the pilot sits on ground. This is we see this in EHang and maybe a handful of others, but most of the platforms that plan flying people from A to B are currently piloted. So that, of course, is also a huge challenge. not just in terms of the extra weight, but also in terms of reaction times. But I don't see. So the thing is, we also have limitations when it comes to pilots, right? So we have reaction times. We have the thing is, if a pilot can't see the takeoff and landing surface at night in fog, where would the person land? Like where's the VFR approach here? So it's probably not doable. So that again leads to operational restraints because the airport cannot be used to the degree as it maybe was defined, you know. So coming to that next step in eVTOL evolution, where you have the pilot not on board, or you have platforms that are fully automated where the pilot is not in but on the loop, I think this would be a big breakthrough, but we don't see the scenario just yet, right? So now the question is, for the first step, do you see a problem for the ground infrastructure in those kind of limitations? Like, do you see, I mean, if you're a certified airport, I don't know what the percentage exactly is, but I think you have to be available for air traffic to land in like 95 or something percent. I don't know what it was in the 90s, but I don't know really know what this was. If you now have those restrictions when it comes to flying at night, flying at fog, flying in certain very hot or very cold conditions, this would then limit, you know, the availability for VFR takeoff and landing. Like, do you see a problem in for the financial feasibility in vertiports for that middle part until we have like full autonomy on the flying end? Like, do you see that this both eVTOLs and ground infrastructure will not be very feasible in that time where platforms are still piloted? Do you have a take on that?
So a very short note, and then I let Jose go. But so we have already a lot of VFR operations going on in a lot of areas on the world which are viable today. If not, they wouldn't do it. So I think it's not that big of an issue as a lot of people think, but it's just not the case for every city or every country. So we need to start in the areas where the operating conditions are good, and there's plenty of it, and there's many with high demand. And then with the evolution of the aircraft, we can expect the expand the envelope. And this is the basic thing. So I'm not that pessimistic on this topic. And the availability in a lot of cities is quite good. But maybe we don't start in Canada where you have a lot of cold temperature and icing by day one. But yeah, Jose, you have another opinion, I'm sure.
Yeah, I prefer to start in Canary Islands or Palma de Mallorca for sure. It's true that even the eVTOLs are not ready for low or very high temperatures, and we have seen this test failing sometimes to cool the batteries or to heat the batteries because the lithium batteries work very well between 10 and 25 degrees. So this is for the first generation of eVTOLs, especially that are very expensive at the beginning because they are not in mass production. The performance still needs to be improved coming from the batteries. Of course, the capex is going to be high. The opex, also with the pilot at the beginning, the first EASA is considering 2 to 4 years of transition to autopiloted operations, and still nothing is being written for that. So yes, it's true. It's not easy. I wouldn't start in Alaska. I wouldn't start in the desert of Saudi Arabia, of course. It's better to start in low altitude where you have more lift, good temperatures. That's what we are trying at least. Easy win-win strategies, very quick wins. Regarding the viability, people say that when you are going to start with eVTOLs, you need to increase save at least 50% of the time that you are investing in your trip, and not increase the price over 50%. So you need to have a balance for the user to have willingness to pay for saving time with not paying much more money. That's why also for emergencies, I see a lot of use cases that are going to be successful at the beginning, even if it's expensive, because you have piloted operations, ambulances that are in the end electric, not polluting with noise in the cities with CO2. Maybe, yeah, altogether we pay this extra price at the beginning to enter in break even later on, in more years than when we have automated operations where you will have an easier break even reach. Okay, you will make money faster. So a lot of things to be considered, and sometimes it's true that being a big company, where we, for example, have depots for maintaining electrical buses, we can take advantage of these depots to store the eVTOLs in the night, charge with a lower cost of kilowatt, and even get better prices for gigawatts and megawatts that we fix for all the year. So sometimes you will have advantages when you're working multimodality, and you can combine and do synergies in the use cases. So a lot of things to be considered. The grid, okay, where you have grid of energy for megawatts for big eVTOLs. The procedures for maintenance that are not written, for staff to be certified, also not written. So many things to be done, and for me, it's enjoyable because the cost of being an early entrant and a pioneer is that you will have tons of headaches, but you will learn a lot and you will enjoy a lot. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Wise words. We're entering the last 10 minutes of this webinar. And before we go through some more questions, again, thank you very much for those great questions. Please keep on asking while we have all our experts here. I want to ask one last question into the round here. Where do you see the next challenges for you guys individually? Like from your perspective, from your business, what are the things that you focus on right now? And like for you and in general, that would be super interesting to see like what you focus on and what your next steps look like, what kind of limitations you maybe have to work with, what kind of regulatory restraints you might have. Rasha, maybe you can start if you have a look into the future for us. What are you looking at, and what might be the challenges on your way in the near future?
Let me start with the challenges first, and then I'll switch to the vision of the future. So about the challenges, I would say educating the other markets about this new industry, which I mean, it's not really new, but it's happening. But there are other stakeholders that need to be, helping on this and joining in this journey. As I mentioned, there are urban planners, urban designers. Those people can really, and professionals can really help in making this a reality and bringing it properly into market. The other thing I would say is, of course, I mean, and this is I would say a more of a common challenge, is trying to build up on little information from what exists out there. That's simply because it's a trial and error, and this is a very normal thing in this industry. But regardless, even with the little information that we have, well, now it's not really that little, but with the information that we have, we're able to actually come to some type of output. For us at LYNEports, what we focus on for the future is to actually build our software solutions to integrate not only the eVTOLs, not only drones, but also helicopters and also fixed wings aircrafts. So it's going to be encompassing all types of aircrafts, and it's going to be the planning tool or early planning tool for any type of aircraft that anybody could think of. I really see that the future is going to be aviation centric. People will think about switching between air and ground, and it's not about moving things from one location to the other, but rather balancing between them. And this would require a lot of planning, a lot of proper understanding of safety areas, understanding of obstacles, and what it would mean when we're integrating them. That's it.
Thank you so much. Christoph, maybe you want to follow up with your outlook?
Yeah. Can do so. So challenges for us, it's quite a straightforward thing. We see at the moment a few players very much at the edge, having a lot of requirements and needs for features and functions which are very advanced. And you see the broad market is still very nascent. So it's like a juggling between what is really needed for the broad market and where you can earn money and how to stay at the forefront of what you're doing, that you're not losing customers. And this is for us a bit of a challenge since we're not VC backed. So we're doing a bootstrapped approach. We're about 20 people now. We do quite successful what we do, but it's always where do you put your resources in? So I think this is one of the challenges, and the industry is just slow. We all learned that there's a lot of promises on years of takeoff for use space, for drones, for eVTOL, and it's postponed every year. So we really need to see this market, taking off and surviving until then. And we have seen a lot of companies that did not survive. So let's see how this will go on. And the other topic is where do we see ourselves? I think in the chat there was a lot of questions on autonomy. And this is basically what we work on to enable autonomy. And in a first step, it will not be autonomous operations. I think this is very far in the future also for drones. But the next big thing is this remotely piloted one-to-many operations. And what we do with our simulation technology is really about automating human tasks, mainly pilot tasks, but also flight planning, dispatcher tasks, and also a bit of meteorological task at vertiport, and making it accessible in this remote control room. And I think this is a very big thing because then you get to economies of scale because you're not limited to the pilots. And this is what we're working on a lot and our main focus for the next years.
Right. Thank you, Christoph. Jose, what kind of challenges are you facing, and how do you envision the next few years?
Challenges at the moment, to progress fast, to survive a long time. The regulation is not so ready as the technology. The public acceptance is creating some hiccups in the last, in the last Olympic Games, we saw it. It's not easy to make people become believers. In the technical side, there are other things like, studying the right sites for the vertiports. If you have the power grid nearby, if you have micro weather data, so you can ensure that at least you have reliable meteorology data in less than 1 kilometer, because if not, you can get in trouble because you cannot rely on meta information from 10, 20 kilometers away. Things can be very critical in the takeoff and landing. The certification is, we talk about this challenge a lot. We are missing a lot of work here to also the industry to be involved more heavily and giving back also in pushing for creating altogether a regulation that is agreeable for everybody. The battery technology is not improving as fast as we expected 5-10 years ago. We expected an increase of 3% in performance every year. This is not happening. Now some companies are changing to other technologies like solid state. But this, on the other way, they take more time to charge. Okay, and the hot swapping of batteries that some eVTOLs have, it also will compromise the hermeticity and the certifiability of the eVTOL if it goes to the water or whatever. The noise impact, yes, still we need to create noise thresholds in urban areas, in cities. What are the acceptable levels for eVTOLs with these 75 decibels to enter into the cities? Is better than helicopters creating 100, 120 decibels, but it's still sometimes 75 or 80 can be too much for some areas in some cities like parks. We are a bit scared of cybersecurity, that we don't get hacked the control center or the eVTOL itself, because this is dramatic. We can of course do a stress test, learn from incidents, try to not have accidents, just incidents, and report and share. So all the industry should share, because we are not competing at the beginning. We are just trying to make it happen. Okay, so we should be very collaborative for win-win. A lot of technology is still missing. Artificial intelligence will help a bit, because you cannot have one supervisor for every drone, as Christoph was saying. But if you have one supervisor with different options popping up from the artificial intelligence engines, and you can select the right one, you don't need to certify the AI to have the automatic decision, but you can give the quick 3 options to the operator to choose in less than 3 seconds. So you will have their certified decisions, but still you need to train, to create procedures for this. Also, the US space is coming very late. We expected US space to be deployed in some countries in Europe I was participating in tenders already in 2020, and still 4 years passed, and we don't have real use of US space of any country in Europe. So still we need maybe other 4 years to have US space areas in some cities. And many other things like somebody was commenting on cranes. Yes, we need to have more precise databases of obstacles that are static or dynamic in cities. Sometimes you will have trees growing, you will have cranes moving to build skyscrapers in areas, and you need to know where they are in that precise day. So a lot of things are to be solved, but as I was saying with my colleagues here, solving these Sudokus is going to be fun. So let's just enjoy, try to do our best effort and solve it well.
Thank you so much for this. We're nearing the end. Maybe we have 1 or 2 minutes more that we can answer a few more questions. You just mentioned, Jose, the energy density of batteries. I also see that this is a bit of an issue. I mean, it's the best way to transform electrical energy using batteries. It has the least amount of losses. On the other side, one of the questions also is here about hydrogen. Do you maybe see that vertiports might become a bit of an energy hub as well, not just for powering eVTOLs, but maybe also for powering the adjacent area or part of the city? So maybe that this would be a good place for hydrogen storage, hydrogen refueling, all of that, dangerous goods handled in a designated area. Do you see a chance? I mean, it's a lot of loose ends. You just mentioned so many loose ends that you hope to connect in the future at one point. Would you also consider looking into different energy forms like hydrogen?
Yeah, I see more hydrogen under the ground to be very well stabilized, to transport megawatts from one place to the other. Where you are not in a city, you don't have availability for a medium voltage for a lot of amps and megawatts, but you need to bring to a coastal or to an island, to a coastal area or a rural area, a lot of energy. And this is a way to transport energy if you don't have a grid. You don't have directly cables reaching there, and you don't want to build a huge photovoltaic plant. So you can bring fuel cells and charge the eVTOLs that are electric at the beginning with hydrogen energy brought from elsewhere. Later on, after 2035, we expect some hydrogen eVTOLs to start certifying, because it's dangerous. Hydrogen in the air or even in cars, it can be dangerous. You can have problems. So unless they improve the technology of fuel cells to be very contained and avoid the cascade effect that you can have some explosion or something, it will take time to certify this onboard hydrogen. That's why we expect to use it before to transport energy and have it in the ground. Yeah.
And maybe to add on, because I think, to be honest, I don't think the energy density and the range is the biggest issue. So we've seen today, Autoflight was flying 250 kilometers with one battery charge. This is a long distance. I'm not sure if you want to fly more than 1 or 2 hours in an eVTOL without a toilet. So I think there's a natural limit in terms of distance that makes sense for regular operations. And I think we're not too far away of it. It depends a bit on the concept you're choosing. So you have different types, like the multicopter, all the time energy needed to stay into the air, versus you have maybe some with wing combined concepts where you're a bit more efficient in the forward flight. So, but generally, I'm not too pessimistic here. I think this is not really the main issue for the initial use cases. I'm more a bit concerned on the we have a few cities that start with operations, and will we be able to scale? Because if we are not able to scale, and building this infrastructure will take time. So if there's an announcement, it's not happening half a year later that you have 5 other vertiports in another city. So everything is stuck to certain bureaucratic processes you need to follow on. And I think it's really understanding what is the real scale of the industry and building the business cases around it. So even Archer Joby, they're doing a lot of announcements, but yeah, there is not enough aircraft. There's not enough vertiports to start operations of all of that has been announced in the next 2 years. It's like a plan the next 5 to 10 years. So I think it's more a bit aligning the reality and the expectations, and also then the management of the company to this, less than. Oh, I think I muted myself. Yeah, but I just saw an announcement of a couple on 400 watt hours energy density batteries they will test in planes in the next year. So there's still innovation, and it will take time, but I'm not too pessimistic on that. I think it's other things that are more critical for the industry at the moment.
That is true. Critical is also the time. I'm really sorry to bring this webinar to an end. I think it was a very great exchange. Thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, Rasha. Thanks, Jose, for being here, for making the time. Of course, big thank you to our audience joining today. I think it's great when we always connect to so many people that are interested in this topic. This is not the end of it. So this is the end of this session. I will send everyone that joined today a video link so that you guys can revisit. If there are any questions, please reply to that email. I'm very happy to connect you to each of the speakers. If you have very specific questions, I'm pretty sure you can also find them on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out. Yeah, thank you again very much for joining, everyone, speakers and audience, for this great webinar. I wish you a great Christmas time and a good start into the new year. Thanks again very much, and have a wonderful evening or morning, Jose, depending on where you are. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.